Introducing 100 Days of Code with Treehouse. What is 100 Days of Code? It's a long-standing coding challenge created by Alex Calloway, and it's simple. Commit to learning every day for 100 days. The amount that you learn in that short time frame will change your life. Whether you want to level up your skills or jumpstart a new career, commit to the challenge. You'll be shocked by how much you learn and accomplish. You'll have the full support of the Treehouse community of students working with you. We'll be sending you motivational emails, clips from our 100 Days of Code podcast, featuring advice, tips and tricks from developers, and so much more. There's never been a better time to commit to your learning. Join us. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Design Q&A. This is the July edition. I can't believe it's already July, but here we are. All right, so my name is Hope Armstrong. I'm a senior designer and UX design teacher here at Treehouse. And today I'm going to be covering some UX design questions that have been previously submitted. But if you have any questions that come up as you're watching, feel free to pop them into the chat and I'll ask them as I go along. So here's the first question that was submitted before the live stream. Thanks to our great UX design teachers in Slacklands. Thank you so much for submitting some great questions. All right, so what do you think is the best place to look for a job in the field? Also, do you think companies will take into account my skills in web development for the job? So I know there's so many places you can look for a job online, so I just figured I would start with where I personally have found a job. And so here's how I found my job at Treehouse. So at Treehouse, whenever I found out about Treehouse, I was just listening to this podcast called Design Details. And this was in their old format a few years ago where they used to design a different designer each episode and talk about their past and how they got a start in design and what they're working on now. And so they interviewed this designer named Susan Lin, who at the time worked as a product designer at Treehouse. And I just really got intrigued by this company that sounded like an amazing product and something I wanted to be a part of. So I don't think I was necessarily looking for a job at the time, but I just kept an eye on their jobs page. And I think I looked at it on and off for maybe a year and a half. And they finally posted a design position. So I applied and, here I am today. And so before that, I got a job through this website called hired.com. If you go to hired.com, you basically submit your portfolio and all your past experiences. And they create a profile for you. And then at the same time, there's different companies that are on Hired that are looking for designers. So they look through all the portfolios or the profiles rather, and they find designers they're interested in interviewing, and they give them a soft offer in a way. It doesn't really mean an official offer, but they'll say, hey, we're interested in hiring you as a UX designer for $90,000, and then if you're interested, you can choose to interview with them and get hired. And so Hired gets a cut of this. At the time, they were also offering bonuses. I think I got $5,000 as a starting bonus. And so that's another way to find a job. I've also gotten a job through a staffing agency. Staffing agencies usually have temporary roles. So say you work for a company for a year or maybe 6 months, and some of them are contract to hire, meaning at the end of it, you actually can start working full time. And then you can also just look for companies that you admire and just keep an eye on their jobs page, which is something I did at Treehouse, for instance. if you're like zeroed in on one company. And then, of course, there's job boards. So here are some creative ones that just specifically focus on design or other creative types of roles. So there's Dribble, Behance, Creative Mornings. And then there's some more general job boards. AngelList is good specifically for startups. So if you're looking at getting in as one of the first 10 employees somewhere, or there's some bigger companies on there too, but if you're interested in that startup life, check out AngelList. There's also We Work Remotely if you're specifically looking for remote jobs, which of course is really popular nowadays, that a lot of us are working from home, or at least the ones that can work from home are working from home. And then of course, I'm sure that you've heard of Indeed, which is a gigantic job board that has every job under the sun, it seems like. I haven't had any success with Indeed. I've certainly applied to a lot of jobs through Indeed in the past, but I've never gotten hired through that route. Maybe because there's just so many applications for those roles. It's kind of hard to be seen in such a congested flow of job applicants, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's hard to stand out. And then if you are a designer who codes, that will absolutely be to your advantage. There's roles. Actually, even the job at Treehouse was expecting the product designer to know HTML and CSS at least. So, it is baked in a lot of design roles, but it's not baked into all design roles. So if you do have that experience, that will definitely help you out. All right, so that was my answer to the very first question, and I'm just going to check to see if there's any more questions so far. Okay, none so far. So I'm just going to continue on with the next question that I got. But feel free to stop me if you have any other questions that come up. Okay, so this is a big question. How should I price UX design projects for freelancing? Okay, so when I saw this question, I thought, wow, they're really asking the heavy hitters. They aren't messing around. Because this is really a difficult question to answer. And I've been in the field over 10 years now, and I've done some freelancing, but I don't think I've got it all figured out. And I think a lot of designers have anxiety around pricing. So just so you know, if you're feeling that way too, there's other people that feel that way, if that's any comfort to you. So yeah, like I said, I haven't freelanced a ton. Mostly what I do these days is volunteer for some nonprofits that I believe in. So I have about 3 different nonprofits that I'm doing design work for now, and I don't charge them. They're nonprofits that I believe in, and I'm happy to support their mission without needing any money for it. And they're very appreciative of that fact. But I have done some freelancing for companies, and so I have some sense for the pricing, and I've also been reading about it too. So the pricing, of course, will depend on where you're located, the cost of living in that area, your expenses. Don't forget that taxes can take out an obscene amount of the earnings that you get. Something like 30% is not uncommon. So you want to make sure that you're pricing your prices so that when the taxes are taken out, you can still have a profit. Once you cover, paying for the Creative Cloud and all your other expenses, like your expensive computer that can handle your design program and XYZ. And then also your experience level. So of course, as you get more senior, you can charge more. You're getting more efficient and skilled in your craft, and so you can charge accordingly. But there are 2 main pricing methods. There's the time-based method and then the project rate method, where you basically say, I'm going to create 5 landing pages for you, and that's going to cost X amount of money. So I'll just do a little bit of pros and cons for these different time-based rates. So for time-based rates, you can do hourly, or you can do a day rate. And the pros is that you get paid for your time, and it reduces any kind of scope creep or endless revisions, because the client's paying for your time per hour, so they want to make sure they're really careful about how much they're asking, because it's going to be more money they have to pay, right? The cons are, let's say you get really efficient and you knock out those 5 landing pages in, let's say 5 hours. That's probably not even humanly possible, but let's say you got so efficient that you knocked it out in 5 hours, but then your hourly rate is like $50 an hour. Why did I introduce math to this? Well, you get what I mean. You wouldn't actually earn as much as you'd like, even though you're being more efficient. Right. So, and then the pricing's not efficient, or the pricing's not as transparent for the client, because like the client doesn't necessarily know how long it's going to take for you to complete a project. So a project rate, the client knows exactly how much it's going to cost. They can budget it out and say, yeah, we can afford that. And that sounds great. A con for you as the designer is you could get endless revisions. So let's say you work on those 5 landing pages and then you're like working on it 6 months later because the client still isn't happy with it. So make sure that you build in revision pricing. And the way I've seen this done is you basically say, here's the price for the 5 landing pages, and built in are 2 revisions. And you have to define what you mean by a revision, because there's like a small revision, which is there's a typo. And then there's a big one, which is like, can you just rethink this whole layout for this page? Anyway, and so you can include 2 of those in the original project rate, or however many you decide. And then after that, you can say any revisions beyond that, I charge my hourly rate, which is X. And so that's kind of a blended way you can do it. And so a lot of freelance designers start out with hourly rates. It's just kind of easy to start out with that way. And then they do a mix of both, or they switch to project-based rates. I think it takes a while for you to understand how long it takes you to do a certain task. And then like working with different clients always leads to maybe more efficient or less efficient workflows and takes up more of your time in some cases. So I think it takes some figuring out, and it really depends on your clients and your work. And then if you're actually interested in some dollar signs in this conversation here, I know that these are ballpark figures and probably really vary depending on where you're at in the world, and these are all in US dollars. But I just wanted to give you some ballpark estimates just so you're not totally in the dark. But here's where you can think of like a junior is making $35 an hour to $60 an hour, and so on and so forth for mid-level, senior. And then if you're like super niched and like the expert in usability or something, then you can charge more if you're like a known expert. All right, so I have another question, but I'm going to wait until I finish up this pricing discussion here. Yeah, so you can also go to Upwork.com, which will list other freelancers' rates. And I think this is kind of good for just seeing what the market rate is for designers in your area. So you can check this out and see some other portfolios and some other people's rates. And then, of course, there's other salary tools. PayScale and Glassdoor are a couple examples. Oh, and like by Glassdoor, you can like go to a certain company and you can see salaries for that company, and just to see if you're on par with other designers, and you can convert that yearly salary into an hourly rate. There's calculators online if you search for salary to hourly pay. So I think the main thing is to tweak your pricing over time. So if you tell a client your pricing and they immediately accept it, then your prices are too low because they were like too eager to be down with paying that price. And so the next time you can increase your price and see how they react. or see how the next client reacts. And then if they try to negotiate you down a little bit, your prices are probably just about right. And if they say it's well beyond their budget, you can decide if you want to work within their budget. Maybe it's a cool opportunity. Or maybe you just want to pass on it because it's really not going to be worth your time, or it's not going to be meaningful work for you. So all that to say, you can be swayed by, like I said, working for nonprofits or small businesses. Maybe you connect with their mission, you want to help them out. Maybe they're a friend of yours and they have a low budget. There's also the coolness factor. Maybe your favorite band needs a new website and you would be so honored to create their website as their number one fan. And so maybe you just really want to do it so badly that you lower your prices. And then there's also just good opportunities for learning and growth, and all of that's valid too, of course. But remember to not devalue your work. It can be very easy to be pulled in that direction, but you don't want to end up feeling bitter about it afterwards. There's a site that Jessica Hish made called shouldiworkforfree.com. And you can go there, and it's kind of a playful workflow in figuring out if you should work for free. So it's pretty self-explanatory. You can just go through the flow, answering these yes/no questions. And it kind of helps you decide if you should work for free or if you should charge something. She also made this other tool for basically building an email response to a client whenever you're talking about pricing. So up here, if you go to this link, it's jessicahish.is/helping you answer. You can go check this out. You basically choose the type of client. So up here, I think it was something like corporate client, nonprofit, friend. I just chose doesn't matter. Maybe they have a good budget, but they have a quick turnaround time. You can add in a clause, or this tool adds in a clause that helps you say, oh, I see you want it on Monday, and I'll have to work all weekend and all night. So I do charge a rush fee. So it just kind of helps you construct these different, or construct an email given all these different variables that go into pricing. All right, so I hope that answered your question. I'm just going to pop over in the chat here. All right. Let's see, reading your questions. Yeah, so the general estimates, I think you're talking about, or someone asked, the general estimates depend on what? I think you're referring to that slide I had with all the different rates. Is that right? This one? Yeah, so that just will depend on how experienced you are. Maybe you're freshly a mid-level designer, or maybe you're more on the senior side of mid-level, or maybe you live in an expensive city like San Francisco where the cost of living is super high and you have high rent. Then you're going to have to ask for more money than someone who lives in an area with a lower cost of living. It really just depends on your situation. But yeah, charge as much as you can get away with. You know, like if you're working with a really corporate client that has a big budget and they want to work with you, like maybe that commands a higher rate, or maybe it's going to be a client that's going to need a lot of hand-holding and require a lot of emotional energy. You might want to charge a little bit more so it's worth your time. Maybe you're a mid-level working for a small business, so you want to charge them on the lower end of your scale, so to take into account their limited budget. I mean, I think it's probably fine to change your hourly rate depending on who your client is, right? All right. I think there was one more question. Go back to my spot here. I have a question in regards towards internships. I myself am a coding teacher, and I am trying to find creative solutions for getting students an internship. Based out of the Phoenix area, any tips? Oh, that's a good question. Internships. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to think about this in the context of the COVID-19 environment that we're all in. Because it's like, I wonder how internships are even happening now that we're all sequestered at home and shelter in place orders. Because I think my inclination would be to find any local businesses in the Phoenix area that could use some design interns, and I would specifically look for ones that aren't too terribly small, because then they might not be able to give your students the proper mentorship that they would need. Because I think with an internship, it's, like what is the student going to gain from it is really important. So you wouldn't want to send them to a place that's not, that doesn't have the resources to support them. Like you wouldn't want them to just like reap the benefits of having a design intern, but then not have it be a two-way street where the student also gets some design mentorship as well. So maybe like a mid-sized to larger companies in the Phoenix area, reach out to them. Maybe their HR team would be a good place to start and see if they can get in contact with the design team and see if they have any bandwidth for adding in an intern. I think that would be where I would start looking. I'm not sure beyond that. I'm sure if you Google, like I would have to do, which you've probably already done if you're asking the question, Google like maybe maybe there's some kind of organizations in the area that do like tech meetups, I want to say. Maybe like a tech meetup would have some connections. I think you would just have to work with the connections that you have in the tech industry in your area and see what companies are open to internships. Because I know that a lot of companies like Lyft and Airbnb and other companies I can't think of have like formal design internships, and I'm not sure exactly how they find those students. So, sorry, I don't know anything beyond that. But thank you for your question. And I love that you're getting your students set up with that real world experience, because that is really important. In fact, pretty much like the majority of what I do on my job is stuff I learned on the job. I got my degree from a design school, and I learned a ton about the fundamentals of design. But it wasn't until I got into the industry, started working, that I really started to understand web development more. And frankly, I mean, the whole field of UX design has matured since I graduated. So I couldn't really learn about that in school because it hadn't really become a thing yet. But regardless, that's kind of how I learned, is just on the job. Alrighty. I'm caught up with the questions in the chat, so I'm going to move on to the next question. What are your thoughts on someone creating a UX job for themselves at a company they are already working at versus finding an entry-level UX job elsewhere? In my case, the company doesn't have any UX designers, so I'd be the first despite still being a junior designer. Yeah, I think about myself back when I started at a startup. I was still fairly early in my career. I could have been considered mid-level, but I was still pretty early. I was still pretty fresh on the job. And I started working for I think it was like a 6-person startup. And I was the first and actually the first and only designer at the company. And I think in that case, because the company was so small, I was able to, interact with the entire company and like have that connection with the whole company that allowed me to promote UX design. But I think if it was at a bigger company, I would have no way of doing that because I would have been way too junior, and like I wouldn't have had any kind of visibility with the executives or like working functionally with other teams to use my UX design skills there. Like I couldn't have advocated for UX design at that big of a scale. But since it was this brand new company with only 6 employees, it was easier to spread the UX thought. But it was really challenging from a personal growth standpoint because I had to do a lot of learning on the side to stretch my skills. I listened to a lot of podcasts. I mentioned Design Details. That was one of them that I listened to. And I just had to do a lot of research on my own to develop my skill set. I didn't have the senior designer to lean on and give me tools and recommendations and so on. I just had to research it myself. So I think if you are interested in being really resourceful and creative and coming up with your own career growth, basically, it can work. But just recognize that the company size might make it really hard for you to actually advocate for UX design in the way that you want, and also get resources in the way that you need them. But let's just look at the pros and cons before I get too carried away. So the pros of staying at your company and becoming the first UX designer is maybe you know the business quite well, so you can just hit the ground running and you already know of some UX improvements that can be made at the company, and so you can already have that context from having worked there, and that can be your advantage. And of course, there's a comfort in staying where you are. We are in a pandemic, and so it's naturally comforting to just stay at your existing employer, as long as it's not a toxic place, of course. A con, or some cons, are there's not going to be any design mentorship if there's no other designers at the company. So you're going to have to figure out a lot on your own. And as I said before, you're going to have to advocate for UX design at your company. Maybe some executives aren't even aware of UX design or don't understand the merits. It might be hard to advocate for your work. And then if you go somewhere else, maybe you'll find a company that has an existing design team, and you can have a formal mentorship where someone coaches you along and notices your strengths and your weaknesses and helps build you up and create opportunities for you. This can be in the form of I'm a senior designer. I know there's an exciting project coming up. I would really love Jesse to work on that. He's a design intern, but he has a lot of promise. And, I can vouch for that designer to be put on that project and get that kind of experience. And then, of course, if there's other designers around, you can check out what they're doing, see them in design critique, see what they're working on. And you learn from that way, too. It's not a formal design mentorship, but you still learn from watching others. And then maybe there's already an existing UX design practice with leaders at the top who have a seat at the table who are saying, hey, CEO, we need a budget for design systems. We need a budget for user research. And then that enables you as the junior designer to go out there, pay participants for usability studies, and do other kinds of research that you need to excel at your job. And so a con, of course, if you go elsewhere, is you might have a challenging time finding another job. It's always a difficult thing, interviewing at different companies and trying to get hired. And so, of course, that's naturally a con to leaving your company. So I hope that answered your question. I know I didn't answer it outright, but I think it really does depend on several factors. So it's up to you to decide which route makes more sense in your situation. All right, so I'm not seeing any new questions, so I'm going to mosey on. As long as I can click my Figma. All right, so how old is the concept of user experience design? And what was UX design called before it became an actual field of study? So I saw this question and I was like, I honestly don't even know. I don't even know. I'm gonna have to Google the heck out of this question. And so I've done some research, and just so you know, like you can be in UX design and teach about UX design and maybe not have considered where it even came from. Of course, it does have roots in Don Norman, who maybe you've heard of him. He's written books. He's a psychologist, and probably any number of different titles I'm not thinking of now. Computer scientist, maybe? I don't know, but he coined the actual phrase as we know it, user experience, and he used it to describe his work at Apple in the mid-90s. So that's precisely where the term comes from. And, since then, the term has been used to describe a lot of roles, specifically in tech. And I think it's really gotten its footing in the last 10 years. As I said, I graduated before this happened. So just in the last 10 years, it's really evolved into being what it is today. And I think we do kind of take it for granted, but it really hasn't been around all that long. I guess it's been around 25 years. I think the first part of that in the early 90s, there's the internet happened, and then the spreading of ideas has happened, and then now it's become this amazing field that we all know and love. So before that, back in 1983, Apple released the Lisa computer, which was the first personal computer sold to the public with a GUI. So if you've ever heard of GUI or GUI, it just stands for graphical user interface. So it's the same thing as what we refer to as a UI today. We just dropped the G. So this is what it looked like. It was a big honker, big old thing. But yeah, the GUI, the screen here, is basically, a visual way of interacting with a computer. So it's kind of the start of thinking about human-computer interaction. And of course, you can see the keyboard inspired by the typewriter and so on. But notice there's not a mouse yet. So Apple was inspired by Park, which was, I think, part of Xerox. And this is a Xerox Alto, which is one of the first personal computers, I believe. And you can see a very old iteration of a mouse. And so I think what happened was Park gave Apple employees access to looking at their personal computer. And then Apple took those ideas and ran with it and popularized personal computers as they are today, as we know it. And so surprisingly, a lot of the innovation did happen at Park. And they also created the first GUI. So you can see here it's like a text editor. And there's different ways of formatting the text using different fonts. And there's even this little adorable drawing of a troll playing guitar to a mushroom. And this is a bitmap drawing that totally reminds me of MS Paint, if anyone remembers that. It's basically every single pixel is either a black or a white square, and then it forms this image. So that was way back in the 70s is when they had a UI that looked like this. And then as for the mouse, it was invented by Douglas Engelbart, and through his work at the Augmentation Research Center lab at SRI International. And I think there were some earlier inventions of the mouse, specifically with the trackball. But I think that it had military applications, I want to say. And I think Douglas was the one that inspired more of the everyday consumer using the mouse with this personal computer. And then, so before personal computers became a thing, you can think about the experience side of the word user experience, it extends beyond just computers and technology. So back in the 60s, Walt Disney was working on creating these immersive experiences at his theme parks. And what he did is he conducted user research on his visitors to see what they liked and didn't like. And so you can think of this as very early days user research, even though he didn't call it that. He actually had these 10 commandments that, well, I guess it was more like inspired by Walt Disney, and it was created by the Imagineering department of Disney. But it basically, a lot of these tenets do remind me of the tenets of user experience. So knowing your audience, wearing your guest's shoes, or like seeing things from their perspective, fundamentals of design, like color, shape, form, and texture. Avoid cognitively overloading the user with a ton of information all at once. Just tell one story at a time. And you can read through all these, and it's just really similar to user experience. It's really interesting. And so, continuing to go back into history, Henry Dreyfuss was an industrial engineer, and he worked on improving the usability of the Hoover vacuum cleaner, the tabletop telephone, typewriters, and so on. And he wrote a book about designing for people. And I haven't read the book, but I think it does have some connections that we know of today when we think about UX. And so I realized that a lot of these examples are all just white men, and I just want to just make that as a point. Like, I recognize that this history is very like whitewashed and male-centric. So I know that there's probably some examples in history of women and people of color being a part of this history. It's just I'm not aware of it. And so if you have any examples, please share with me. I've scoured the internet trying to find examples, and it's really difficult to find them. So at this point, we're in the 1930s and 1950s era. So just kind of around that same time, Toyota worked on a production system that was very human-centered. So Tachi Ono and Eiji Toyota, I hope I'm saying that right, were Japanese industrial engineers, and they took a look at the car manufacturing facility and said, how can we make this a better working environment for people? And so they were concerned about the workers' experience, and they interviewed the workers, basically did their own user research, and improved the production process, which is really cool. And a lot of companies do look at Toyota as being a great example of improving manufacturing conditions for their workers. And then kind of the other side of the coin of that is Taylorism, which was in the early 1900s, Frederick Winslow Taylor. He was an American mechanical engineer who sought to improve industrial efficiency. And so he's criticized because he treated humans like cogs in a machine. And so whereas Toyota was more interested in the human experience, Taylorism was more focused on improving efficiency and increasing profit for the companies. And then going all the way back to 400 BC, we can look at Feng Shui for understanding just the importance of space and creating an harmonious environment. So you may have heard of this in terms of arranging furniture in your house in a certain way, being mindful of where the sun rises and where objects are pointing towards. And it's about creating an environment that stimulates good energy. And you can think about this in terms of, user interfaces too. Obviously, space is really important, and how you arrange those elements on your screen is really important, and it's all about creating this harmonious experience. And then a little bit older than that is ergonomics, which has foundations in ancient Greece. So as they were designing their tools and jobs and workplaces, they are interested in making them more comfortable for the user. So like this image here, when you think about when you sit at a computer and you want to try to make sure that you're looking straight ahead and your wrists are straight and you're not causing yourself back pain and all that. Humans have been thinking about that basically, I guess, since tools were invented. So interesting. And then early Egyptian dynasties also, of course, made tools and household equipment, and they even illustrated these ergonomic principles. So probably something like you see here with the woman using a computer. And then if we want to go all the way back, of course, user experience is rooted in design, which can go all the way back to 70,000 BCE. And in like off the coast of South Africa, there's this cave called the Blombos Cave. And it's one of the earliest, if not the earliest, examples of designs carved in stone. So you can kind of see these geometric engravings carved into this stone. So, I mean, humans have been creating designs for a very, very long time. And, maybe this was a cave that someone lived in and they were like creating this environment for themselves. Definitely some connections to the way we think about user experience design today. I know it kind of sounds like a stretch, but this is the root of design, right? And so all that to say, user experience design definitely has come about since the last 25 or in the past 25 years, whenever Don Norman created the term, but really it goes well beyond that because it has roots in psychology and art and computer science and communication and design. So all of those have individual histories that I didn't even touch on, but I hope this gave you some insight into some of the historical references of user experience design. Okay, so that was a mouthful. Let me just check the chat here. All right, from a technical web developer. How can I, as a developer, better communicate with my designer when certain designs are unfeasible, but not make it seem like I'm dismissing the idea altogether? Oh, I really love this question. Yeah. Okay. Let me digest it for a second here. Okay. So you're a developer. I'm a developer. I get a design, and I'm like, I don't even think that's possible. And then you don't want to dismiss the idea altogether because you're like, I'm just the developer. I just want to give feedback, but I don't want to insult the designer. If it's unfeasible to the point where it's like the designer wants like hieroglyphics coming out of the screen or something, like I don't even know if that's possible. Then of course you'll have to say like, oh, there's technical considerations, like this isn't like technically possible with our system. Maybe come up with an idea that would be similar that you know of that could be something in place of that idea. But if it is feasible, so I've gotten this feedback before several times because I've gotten a lot of really good ideas from developers that I've worked with. Because often developers are really good systems thinkers and they're like, wait, this wouldn't work in this edge case where a canceled account, what's it called? A canceled account signs up for the platform again, and they're like wanting to buy a gift card and XYZ. Like they think of all these different examples of like workflows, and maybe that doesn't work with the user flow that I have in mind. So I really value that feedback because it's often something I hadn't even considered. So I just think it just makes sense that you would just explain why you think it's possibly not feasible, or maybe explain why, kind of like coming at it from where you're sitting, and see if you can explain in a non-technical way. I'm stumbling through my answer on this one. Yeah, I mean, in terms of dismissing the idea, I think you just need to maybe start from where the designer is coming from. Like, oh, I understand you want this to happen, which is great. I love the idea, but there's this technical consideration that you might not be aware of. And then explain that to someone who might not be very technical. So just simplify it and try to use simple words that people understand. And then the other thing is come up with maybe an alternative that you have in mind, or ask questions like, hey, if this isn't possible, if this part of your idea is not feasible, is it okay if I leave that part out and do the rest? Or can I replace that part with this other thing that's similar but not exactly what you want? I mean, I think it's just part of having a conversation. And as a designer, I really value that when developers look at something with that eye for detail and, are being upfront with me, because it's another form of feedback that I can take as a designer. Because I want to make sure it's like useful and feasible, because like I don't want you to spend forever trying to design something that's really overly complicated, that's not going to have a lot of end value. Or I don't want you developing something that I didn't fully flesh out. Maybe it's got some usability issues. Maybe it doesn't work for a certain type of user or a certain type of situation a user's in. I think it's just all about having that conversation, but recognizing that the designer has good intentions. So just kind of meeting them where they are, if that makes sense. Cool. So that's it for the questions in the chat here. Can you talk more about, let me just adjust myself here. Can you talk more about how to approach companies or clients? I was reading up on something called the Canvas strategy proposed by Ryan Holiday, and I think it's interesting. Just wanted your take on it. Yeah, so when I got this question, I had not heard of the Canvas strategy. So first thing was for me to look it up, and I found this blog post that he wrote about the Canvas strategy. And it took me a little bit to kind of unpack it, but his whole headline is find and make canvases for other people to paint on. So he breaks it down like this. So in other words, discover opportunities to promote their creativity, find outlets and people for collaboration, and eliminate distractions that hinder their progress and focus. So I kind of understand the gist of this, because I think sometimes when I work with clients, they're really eager to make their mark on their project. Like they're so jazzed about the process that they want to get involved themselves. And in that sense, it kind of like validates the idea if their voice is a part of it. They're like, oh, hey, I did that. I made that decision. That like strokes my ego and makes me feel like I'm leading this whole thing and I know what I'm doing. And, there are clients that really want to be involved in that way. And I think it's sweet. It's like they want to be part of the process. And so I think that's kind of the gist of what Ryan Holiday is saying here, is that you want to make other people feel good about the process and feel involved. And you also just want to like pull out ideas from their head. I think sometimes with clients, it's really difficult to kind of understand what they have in mind, because I think sometimes clients have a specific vision, but they don't necessarily have the vocabulary to communicate that vision to a designer. Because I think designers obviously, go through this education to understand how to talk about design fundamentals and like what's working, what's not working. But then clients that don't have a design background kind of struggle to find those words. And so it can create some friction with the client designer communication because they're kind of speaking two different languages. So I think that's definitely something to consider. And basically, I think Ryan's thinking of different ways to pull that information out. And he gave these examples, which kind of helped me understand where he was coming from. So in one case, it's giving, pulling from examples from books or popular culture and saying like, hey, check this out. I think this will inspire us on this project together. Or, hey, have you talked to this other person? What do they think about it? Or, maybe you two could like put your heads together and inspire each other. Or like maybe you have an idea for improving their process. And I think these are all just like different ways to get the client to open up and like really share with you their perspective. But you want to make sure that you're not going to give them a lot of extra work because they're really coming to you as the designer to fix their problem. Like they don't necessarily always want to do a ton of work, right? Like you're the expert. So I would be careful to not ask too much of your clients because you do want to make their lives easier. And I think Ryan Holiday is saying, some of these solutions live within your client and it's all about pulling it out of them and putting it on a canvas as the final product. But I think sometimes it's not super realistic because the client's really busy and they just hired you as the designer to take care of it. So it's kind of a happy balance because you want to get their perspective because they know the business, they have the strategy in mind, they know where the company's going, they know where it's been, they have all this really valuable information that you as a designer need in order to be creating something that's really successful. But at the same time, like they have limited time and they also aren't versed in UX design and you are. So it's that pairing between you two that you have to figure out the balance of. So the way I think about client relations is number one, of course, listening to the client and asking questions to get to the why. So sometimes clients can ask for something which isn't exactly what they need. So just kind of understanding the root causes or the root problems and addressing it from there versus maybe their like knee-jerk reaction to describe what they need. And of course, put yourself in their shoes as much as you can. Also to Ryan Holiday's point, I think he was getting at, putting yourself in their shoes and seeing what kind of pain points they have and what ways that you could really make their lives easier. All right, and that was my very last slide. So I think we have just a few more minutes here, about 5 minutes left to answer any questions. I see there's a new one in here. What's the future of web development and securing a job as a noob in these times? So for those of you who don't know what a noob is, it's a very new / unexperienced person, I think is the right way to describe that. The future of web development. Well, that's interesting because I think for sure there's going to be more and more remote jobs available, which I think is exciting. And I think that opens up more people to work in tech. So, really we've seen these tech communities based around San Francisco and Austin, Texas, and Denver and New York City and other cities outside of the U.S. I'm just very U.S. centric being in California and often has relied on people living within those metro areas and paying this high cost of living. So I do like how web development is becoming more freely accessible to people that don't live in those big metropolitan areas. So it's kind of democratizing that the industry, right? So I'm excited about that. I've already worked at Treehouse remotely, so I'm a little biased in being pro remote work, but I think it does open up a lot of access to more people working in web development. And then from a technical standpoint, I think tools like Webflow are really interesting, just in the sense that it's kind of part of the no code movement, which I think can sound a little bit antithetical to Treehouse and the mission of learning how to code, but I think it's totally not. I think it goes hand in hand, because tools like Webflow, where you can kind of have like some drag and drop capabilities, but then also be able to look under the hood and like actually do the code and set up databases and stuff. I think that is really powerful to have both, because there's been times where I've made tools that help staff outside of the design department update landing pages, and a lot of times it's just very simple, like text and image updates to a web page, and that don't necessarily need a pull request from GitHub, right? So I think it's really fun to be able to it's fun to see that there's more and more sophisticated tools that get to that reality where it's, a website that has this drag and drop capability that more people can use, but then at the same time, like speak to the technical audience that works on the underlying system to make things happen. So I'm really excited about that. I think there's also increasing conversation about ethics. I would love to do a course on design ethics, which also ties in with web development, of course. Web development ethics, like what should we do with all this consumer data? Like, is it fair to mine people's data? Like, who owns the data once it's been mined? I think that's interesting. What else was I going to say? I don't know. Augmented reality has been around for several years now. People say it's going to like kick off anytime now. But I'm thinking maybe since we're all trapped at home more, maybe there'll be more augmented reality experiences, like maybe, I don't know, like a Netflix show that can like come into your living room somehow in a non-creepy way, but like in a graphical way. Securing a job as a noob in these times. I guess I did touch on that a little bit with the remote work. I think it's opening up more opportunities for finding a job no matter where you live. But at the same time, I know that companies are probably acting much more conservatively with their hiring. So I don't know really realistically how the job market is, given that I haven't been looking for a job because I have a job right now. Securing a job as a noob. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it helps to have personal projects if you have the bandwidth for it. Just work on any personal projects to expand your skill set and be able to add to your portfolio, or from a developer's perspective, I guess, fill out those little green squares on your GitHub profile and have, repos that you've worked on as a passion project. That all helps to kind of like round out your experience if you don't have so much in-house work with clients. So I hope that answered all your questions. And if you have any more, please pop them into the chat and I'll try to take a look later. And otherwise, I think that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so honored that people watch these. This is so cool. And I love being able to connect with y'all in real time. And thank you so much. So have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time.